Hi America, hello world. My name is Adrian Lee and I've been joined today by Shawna Marshall, who is running for office as the state senator for District 22 as a Democrat. Thank you for joining me today. It's very kind of you to come along into our studio.
Oh yeah, it's my pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to chat with you.
Well, we're going to have some fun with this, so we'll ask you some very strange and bizarre questions, as well as the normal ones that I'm sure you've been answering over the last few months.
Yes, I've answered the normal ones time and time again, so I welcome the strange and unusual ones.
And we're going to get strange and unusual, I suspect, before the end of the interview. Before we make a start, District 22, obviously I'm foreign. Where does that represent? What geographical area is that?
Well, because the Senate districts are based on population and our district is very rural, we have a very large landmass. So our district stems from the South Dakota border over to Lakefield.
Right.
And then from the Iowa border, just shy of Marshall, 4 miles shy of Marshall is where our northern border is.
How far do we go east? Are we going towards like Walnut Grove? I mean, we're sitting in Windham.
We encompass Walnut Grove. We encompass Lamberton. I think Lamberton is kind of our eastern border there, right. Northeast.
That means you've got lots of traveling to do.
I've had lots of traveling this summer. It's worn my car down on it. I need some vehicle repairs currently.
Well, if you get into office, you'll have to bring the gas prices down because I think that's going to be expensive, isn't it? Driving around all over the place.
Oh, yes, definitely.
Am I right in thinking you're the first woman to run for office in District 22? Is that correct?
That is correct, and I did not know that when I entered the race and later found out that I am the first woman from either major party to run for state senate in our district.
That's amazing when you consider we're in 2020 and that's never happened before, right?
Right.
That gives you a real sense in many respects of some of the things that are going wrong in American politics, that we don't have that diversity that's perhaps reflected, in other places that are more sort of cosmopolitan and more sort of built up, I guess, conurbation.
Right. That's very much part of our struggle. I think that we need to push toward our leaders at all levels reflecting the population that they represent.
Tell me a little bit more about yourself. Tell me where you were born, where you grew up. Tell me about yourself to start with before we jump in and do the politics.
So I grew up in this area over past the South Dakota border, right, and went to school there. I went to undergrad right there in Sioux Falls. I went a little south to Yankton for my graduate degree, and then I moved to Minnesota for work. So I started off up in Marshall and then kind of migrated down to Laverne. But I've been working in the 5-county area that encompasses a large part of our district,
right, for
about 7 years now, doing mental health in this area.
I should suspect that working in mental health has given you all the tools you need to be a politician, I would suggest.
I kind of think so, yeah. Because it's given me, one, an opportunity to meet and talk to a lot of populations that I really wouldn't in any other realm of my life. And so then I get to hear what are their struggles, what are the obstacles that need to be addressed that aren't currently being addressed. And it's also, I view being a state legislator as being the advocate for the people that you're representing. And
yes,
as a counselor, that's what you are. You hear what your client is going through, you hear the struggles, and then you help them advocate for themselves, but also you advocate for them in the areas where they can't.
I think one of the most important things you've mentioned there is that you listen. I've had dealings, as many people have in Minnesota, with City Hall, local government, and they just don't listen to you. It's almost rhetoric and platitudes just to get rid of you because you're an annoyance almost. I think the ability to listen is something we've lost in politics all over the world, to be honest. I mean, that's a gift, isn't it, as a psychologist? Is your background in psychology? What did you study?
I studied clinical mental health was my master's. My undergrad was in psychology, but so I can't prescribe medications or anything like that. So. But yes, you're absolutely right that communication at every level has broken down. Like, I've talked to the city governments, and the state government doesn't communicate with them, doesn't come back to them. Our state representatives don't come back to our communities and say, hey, what do you need? Like, communication has broken down at every level in every relationship, and that really is what needs to be mended.
I think it would be remiss of me not to ask this, because every psychologist I've ever met, and I actually lived with a psychologist for many years in London, and this was true in that relationship as well. Every psychologist I've ever met, and if this is a cliche, you can shoot me down in flames, studied psychology first and foremost because they wanted to know about themselves. Does that make sense? And what happened in their life. Would that be fair, or is that a cliche, do you think?
I would say...
Oh, no, you're giving too much away now. Look. Don't think about it. Just come out with the answers.
Reluctantly, I would say that's probably true.
That's not a criticism, of course. I mean, you want to know why things happen in life. You want to know why things have happened to you as an individual, don't you? That's the key with psychology, first and foremost.
It tends to be, yeah. We want to know, yes, exactly, why things happen in our own life that we haven't quite figured out. And then it is much easier to help other people figure out struggles than yourself. So that's a big draw to psychology as well.
Do you think having a background in psychology also means that you can read people better? Because I now have an understanding, based on the psychologists I've met and the conversations I've had, that, for example, if you talk to someone and they start scratching their ear, that's a tell, and it means they're lying. Do you watch, for example, the debates on the television, and as a psychologist see someone scratch their ear or, cover their mouth with their hand as they're talking, and you think to yourself, in the back of your mind, you're thinking, that person's just lied. That person has not told the truth. Does that happen with you?
Oh, there's a lot of that. A lot of it is also kind of being aware of, okay, he adjusted his tie. Right. He's uncomfortable with this. Or some of the verbal manipulations that politicians have a tendency to do, recognizing that and be like, okay, he's trying to make you feel this way, right, and he's saying exactly what he's saying to make you feel this way.
To be fair, though, we're social beings, aren't we? And we want to get on with one another. So I'm sat across from you and we're going to be mirroring each other. There's eye contact. There's things we do as a society to try and create little groups and to get on with the person you're engaging with, aren't there? But I think, what I've experienced in this country as well is watching the television and seeing all of that, almost having an existentialist moment where you're taking yourself away from the debate, almost with the sound down, and seeing how their mannerisms and seeing how and of course they get coached in this, don't they? Right. But I think underlying, you can't get rid of that. It's so ingrained, isn't it, in our DNA? You can't almost coach yourself out of that.
No, you really cannot take yourself out of your own perspective. I mean, you could try, but there's going to be some of that you're still going to fall into. You can only look at it from your own perspective. And yes, I mean, a lot of these politicians are coached in mirroring, in how to feel like, or how to make somebody feel
empathy.
Yes, that you empathize with them, that you're one of them. Whether you feel that way or not, you learn how to put that across.
Right.
And that's a struggle for me to witness in the political world, because it needs to be authentic.
Right. I understand that. So let's learn a little bit more about your personal life before we run into the politics. I believe you're a mother. So not only are you embarking upon all of this work and travelling all over the southwest of Minnesota, I believe you've got 2 children. Is that correct?
I do. I have 2 sons.
Right.
So I have Julian, who is 4, and Avery, who is 1.
You have your work cut out, don't you?
Yes, very much. And then we also have, I have 3 stepchildren that are here. They were here over the summer. Okay. So that made that interesting. And they are almost 8, 10, and 12.
So going into politics is what is going to get you away from all these screaming children, right? This is the plan. You're removing yourself.
No, my children are why I'm going into this, but for a different reason.
That's the perfect answer, and we'll stick with that, I believe. So we're going to have a bit of fun right now. Okay. One of the things I've been doing when I've been interviewing prospective politicians over the last couple of weeks is, and I've mentioned this to you before, when you see the names of people, when you see Marshall outside of someone's house with a sign in the front yard, you don't get any understanding or sense of who that person is. It's just a name. It doesn't mean anything unless you've met the person or you've caught the interviews.
And that's why I do put my picture on my yard signs, so that they can get at least a visual of who I am. Sure.
And I have been on your website. Of course, before we did this interview, I'm doing my research. And you do have videos of yourself talking on there. I've noticed that you, how would you describe that? I'm obviously very old and you're very young. So, how would you describe that when you're videoing yourself and you're kind of doing to camera? It's almost like a selfie, isn't it, I guess?
Yeah, it's like a selfie video, I suppose. But you work with what you have.
Again, well, let's cut to the chase. What would you say to people that would say to you, well, you're very young to be running for a prospective senator for the Democrat Party? What would you respond to with that?
I would say that's a positive thing, in my opinion, because like we were talking about earlier, we need people who reflect our population. So that means we need younger people, we need women, we need people of color. We need to reflect our population. So it can't all be 70-year-old men.
and that's what it is. It's very noticeable when you watch the debates. Obviously not the case with the vice president.
Right.
But, it's just a group of old men arguing amongst themselves. White men. A group of old white men. And I'm thinking, how does that represent the country? It seems such a kind of very jaundiced view of this country as a whole, which is a melting pot of other nationalities that have come here,
right,
other than, of course, the Native Americans.
So, no, I'm very proud to be among the younger population going into this, to be a woman going into this, and to see around me some of the other women and people of color. In Worthington, we have Ida, who is running for city council, who is a person of color, who is a woman. Up in, District 16? We have Dory.
You're looking at me as if I might know what District 16 is. These are just random numbers you're
in Marshall.
In Marshall, okay.
And she's very young, and she's running for House. I think she's just graduating college. So we are seeing a change in the trend. We are seeing people who do reflect the population come into this, and that, I think, is a huge strength and a huge positive.
Well, answer this for me then. How do you get young people engaged with politics? How do you get them involved?
Well, I think we really need to change the message. We need to let them know that it actually does matter, that they can make a difference. Because right now, I know a lot of people feel like their voices don't make any difference. They aren't being heard.
Yeah, they're disaffected.
Yes.
It doesn't
they're disenfranchised,
represent
and they
them.
don't see that they could even get into it, because it's a world of 70-year-old white men. So, and we need to change the mindset of the population, honestly, because we are voting for those 70-year-old white men. We need to look beyond that and change our mindset that that's who is supposed to be there.
I'm not comparing America to Britain, because they're very different countries, different populations, different climates, different ways of being. We've had 2 female prime ministers. Things aren't perfect, of course, but there are a large number of female politicians and of colour. I just don't see that reflected here. I don't know if we're a bit further down the road, or as a multicultural society of which Europe is. I mean, you can't get away from the fact that Britain was invaded by Saxons, Romans, Vikings, Normans. We are a mixture of things in the same way in which America is. But I just don't see that diversity. It's not perfect in Britain by any means. I'm not sat here eulogising Britain, but I think as someone who's seen both sides and has been in both countries, I've been here for 10 years now, I find it remarkable that we're in 2020 and we're still having a discussion about this.
Right. I think we have a very long way to go, but at least we are taking steps to get there, and we have people willing to be brave enough to take those steps to get there, because it does take some bravery, because there is a very strong mindset still that a woman's place is not in a leadership position. We, especially in this district where it's very conservative and it's older. And so that mindset is still pretty prominent.
Yeah, it's something that needs to be broken. I did promise our listeners that we were going to do something fun, and I got on to talking about how old you were. Now, because this is the radio, I introduced you as being young, and I introduced myself as being old. I'm sure there's people sat at home now thinking you're 16 and you need to be doing your homework and you need to be in bed shortly. So I don't want to ask a lady how old she is, but on this occasion, tell our listeners how old you are.
I'm 35, so I have gone through college, grad school. I've been in my career for almost a decade now, so I am old enough to be going about
I just wanted to emphasize, because I said that people might criticize your youth, I didn't want people, obviously we're a radio show, people don't get to see you. I didn't want people thinking in the back of their mind, you have knowledge and wisdom is what I'm suggesting here.
I have some.
You have some. Well, it would be ridiculous to say that you know everything,
right.
wouldn't it?
No, we are always on a journey of learning, and I embrace that completely.
100% true. Right, we're going to have a little bit of fun just to see who Shawna is. So we're going to have quick fire questions, and we'll have a discussion about some of these. Tea or coffee?
Depends on the mood.
Bearing in mind I'm British, tea or coffee?
Tea.
Tea. Right answer. You're winning points. I'll vote for you. That's awesome. What type of tea? Any kind of breakfast tea or?
I have this Mediterranean tea where you put sage in it, and it's beautiful.
So sort of more of a green tea.
Or an herbal tea. Yeah. Yep.
Herbal teas. Obviously, being British, it's black tea because we stole all our tea when we had the British Empire. We stole all of India's tea.
All of your cuisine that's good, you stole. So.
Wow, that took a turn, didn't it? So what's your favourite cuisine then? Pizza from Italy or hamburgers from Germany or lasagna from Italy?
Touche.
This is where yeah, you're messing with the big boys now. Not a coffee fan, or occasionally?
Not straight black coffee. Like I like a good mocha, like an espresso, right. But
trust me, if you get the position of senator for District 22, I suspect you'll be drinking a lot more coffee. I think that's going to happen. Cats or dogs?
Dogs.
I promise not to tell your cats that you said that. Do you have pets?
I don't currently, actually. My partner is severely allergic to cats, so we can't have cats. And my dog lived with my mom that we had for 14 years, and we recently lost him. But
with a couple of boys, you need to embrace some sort of pet there at some point. It would have to be a pet with no hair. Lizard, maybe. Tortoise, something like that.
We've talked about it. My little boy, my 4-year-old, very much wants a dog, but we are so busy, and I believe if you have an animal, you need to have the time to devote to it.
Oh, yes. I don't have the time to devote to the pug that I have that's upstairs at the moment that whined all the way through the first 10 minutes of this show. So if there was some strange sounds in the background, no one was being murdered here. That was my pug looking for some attention. Vanilla, chocolate, or strawberry?
Chocolate.
Chocolate. So that seems to be the go-to place, doesn't it? So chocolate milkshakes, chocolate ice cream.
Actually, mint and chip is my favorite ice cream. But
I'm not a big fan of mint, but I'd have it with chocolate.
Yeah.
I couldn't do like mint toothpaste. I'm not a big fan of mint toothpaste.
No, I don't do that. But mint and chocolate is brilliant.
Well, there are some hot chocolates that have mint in them. Mm-hmm. They're very good, aren't they? We're coming up to the winter season. We'll sit outside with a hot chocolate with mint in it. Hot dogs or hamburgers?
Hamburgers, definitely.
Definitely hamburgers.
Yes.
Everything on them? Is there a particular...
No pickles. Oh, I hate pickles.
Without pickles? So you're running on an anti-pickle ticket is
definitely,
what you're running on?
Yes.
We'll make up some T-shirts for that. So if I had to say to you, we'll go and get a hamburger, where were we going? What's your favourite hamburger? Bearing in mind there's lots of fantastic hamburger sellers out there. We're not just being sponsored by anybody.
My first thought would be heading over to Sioux Falls to like JNL or JNR. What is it called?
A&R.
But they have a...
Is it A&W?
No, not them.
Well, you're dealing with a foreigner. This is all strange to me.
No, downtown. They have awesome hamburgers, though.
So we're not talking sort of mass-produced. This is a little outfit.
Oh, yes. It's yeah, and they have great hamburgers.
If we had to go for one of the big chains, where would you go, do you think?
Culver's?
Yeah, we're on the same page as that as well. I like Culver's. If my parents were here and I said, I want to give you a piece of Americana, first of all, I'd take their wallet, and then I'd take them to Culver's would be the way to go. I do like Culver's. That's
my partner, he makes the best hamburgers. Very good chipotle pepper hamburgers.
Well, we need to have a barbecue going.
Definitely.
And raise some funds there. I'd come over for that. A bit more personal now. Bath or shower?
Again, depends on the mood. Bath when I want to relax. Shower just when I don't have time.
When you don't have time and it's in and out. I think the trouble with the bath is you sit there and then you suddenly start to look at moles that you didn't realise you had and you panic yourself. I don't remember seeing that.
I read a good book in the bath and light a candle and turn on a little music and just have a relaxing time.
That's a full-on experience.
Yes.
You've got a strawberry daiquiri, a nice big fat cigar.
Wine. No, a bath has to have wine.
I've been doing it wrong all these years.
Yes.
I was going for the cigar and strawberry daiquiri, but wine apparently is the way to go. Star Trek or Star Wars? You could lose voters here, so be careful.
I know, right? Can I hedge my bets and say they both have their positives?
Yes, you can be a politician and do whatever you wish. I'm going to pin you down because I don't want people complaining that I've let you off like they do with the debates.
Star Trek definitely has more nuanced characters, but sometimes you can enjoy just the black and white of Star Wars.
That's the most political response to a question I've ever had. You'd think we'd be discussing like racism or abortion laws. I'm really going to have to pin you down.
People get serious about this.
I know they
Adrian.
do. There's fist fights. I've seen stormtroopers beating up Klingons at conventions. It was terrible at Crypticon. There was mess everywhere. There was Cardassians attacking Wookiees. I've never seen anything like it. I've got vested interest in this because the first film I ever saw when I was a small boy was Star Wars.
Oh, really?
So it's a good place to start. Your first trip to the cinema, you're in East London, massive Art Deco, you have all the writing come up, far, far away.
I wasn't born when they first came out.
Wow. Wow. I see what you've done there. What was the first film you saw at the cinema? Most people, it's like Disney stuff, isn't it? Like Jungle Book and Snow White.
I don't even remember. Like, I was a small child in Southern California, so we saw movies all the time.
It was just something that happened.
It was just something that happened, yeah.
You're not going to get let off lightly with this either, actually. These are more difficult than the political questions, aren't they? I'm sorry. Look, you're sweating. Football or baseball?
Football, definitely.
Is there a team you follow?
I don't know if I want to say that. I'm going to lose voters there, too.
Well, you're going to have to commit. I don't want to be seen to be giving you an easy ride on this. This is going to be like the LA Raiders or something.
I should say the Vikings.
Okay, you should say the Vikings.
But prior to this year, I liked the Patriots.
Okay, well, it's got England in the name. I'm happy to embrace that.
But then Brady left, and so now they...
So you're not going to go to the Buccaneers?
No.
Are you impressed with my knowledge of football?
I am.
I'm
yes.
astounded myself. I don't know where that came from. I made some sort of synaptic link and suddenly come up with some names of some teams.
I'm impressed that you weren't talking about soccer when you asked me the question.
Well, we can talk about soccer. Are you a fan of soccer?
I know nothing about
soccer.
Nothing.
In about the same way I know nothing about baseball. What about things like hockey, basketball? There's a lot of sports over here that...
There are. And hockey, I know, is huge in Laverne.
What did you do when you were little? What did you play? Did you have sports when you were younger?
I was not in any, team sports like that. I was in some martial arts. I was in some dance. I was in a lot of, acting and drama classes.
You were reading books, preparing yourself to be a senator,
I was reading a lot of books, yes.
Well, that's held you in very good stead, because what I'm going to ask you now is, what aspect of your career, and we spoke about the fact that you worked in the mental health field, what aspects of your career do you think helps you to be dealing in politics or the world of politics?
Well, like we talked about a little bit earlier, is that being able to listen, being able to know how to communicate in an unbiased way. I think that will be huge in serving in the state senate, because you have to listen to the other side, you have to listen to the people you represent, you have to listen to the communities. There's a lot of listening that should go on that isn't currently going on. So my job has prepared me for that. We get into difficult conversations, difficult situations where we hear a lot of struggles and we focus on solutions. And I think that is a piece that needs to be in politics right now as well.
The thing about listening is you get to hear the other person's point of view. And on the back of that, you can then formulate your opinion better, because you're thinking, well, what's my counter argument to that? Or if they come up with that again, I'm going to need to be prepared to work on my own opinion to be able to have a response to that. This is almost like Hegelian philosophy, that someone comes up with a thesis or an essay, you have the counter of that, you put the two together and then make a synergy, and you keep going and keep going. So if you never listen, how can you form your own opinions or have a response to the person when they come back with that?
Right. If you don't listen, then your response is only what your opinion was going to be anyway. You're not integrating new information.
Well, let's open this up a little further then. Outside of your job, as a person, your personality, your character, what do you think? And this is almost like a job interview now, so I apologise. What area of your character and personality gives you the tools to be doing the job as a senator in this area?
Well, I think the fact that I do care quite a bit about people and their situations, and in my own life, I've lived a lot of different situations. I've been in a lot of different environments, and so there's a lot that I could empathize with and understand that a lot of people just haven't been in those situations. And I'm not afraid to speak up and to fight for the things that I find important. And even if that means not always agreeing with my own party, my own team, even if that means, somebody might be upset with me, if I feel like it's what's best for the people that I'm representing, that I care about, I will fight for it.
So we mentioned your age earlier, but the suggestion is you've done so much and so many things have happened to you, because even the bad things that happen to you give you the tools to be able to deal with that and to see people's perspective. I don't want to delve too deeply into your past, but isn't there a sense that you can empathize with people easier if you've been in their shoes and you know what that feels like?
Oh, definitely. And just being in the field of mental health, it helps you learn to empathize and put yourself in other perspectives. And that sometimes can become difficult, because then you get so good at putting yourself in somebody else's shoes that you could really understand wherever they're coming from. Like, so in personal life, that could be hard, because it gets hard to be mad at somebody if you could understand why they're acting the way they're acting.
Sure.
But I think in politics, that could be helpful, because then you can understand why they're looking at it, why they're looking at an issue or a situation in the way they are, and you could be able to reach common ground a little easier.
Do you think it's important then, as someone who works in the mental health field, that, just who counsels the counsellor? Do you see what I mean? Is there moments when you're empathic and you can put yourself in other people's shoes? That must be very difficult emotionally, and taking on other people's issues and problems if you're that kind of person.
Oh, yes. Well, that's why secondary trauma is a thing that we talk about in the field. But that's why it's good to know your own boundaries.
Right.
And it's good to practice self-care and making sure that you're still doing what you need to do for yourself.
Sure. I mean, you can't help other people if you're not healthy yourself at the end of the day.
You can't pour from an empty cup. That's what I tell most mothers that I work with.
That's a phrase that comes up in many different fields, doesn't it? Yep. Unfortunately. Now, this country, I'm going to get more political now. This country has become very polemic. It's very polarized. You have the two parties and there's almost a chasm in between at the moment. How can you appeal to the people that are listening that have always voted Republican, for example, or undecided? Because at the end of the day, those are the people that are going to make the difference between whether you're voted in to be senator or not. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, that's absolutely correct.
When you've got such a polarized, polemic group of people that have dug their heels in, how would you then appeal to those individuals to come across? What would be your response to that? How would you appeal to those individuals?
Well, I think there's a lot of people that are in that middle ground, that middle chasm that we don't talk about very often. And for those people, that's why as part of my platform, I'm not focusing on what's going on federally. I'm not focusing on who's sitting in the White House, because I believe that we just need to focus on Minnesota and what we can do for Minnesota. And that would benefit those people as well. Because then it's not, a lot of those people in the middle, they believe in, personal autonomy. And we can do that through focusing at a state level, through meeting the needs of our communities and our individuals without relying on the federal government to come in and do it for us. It's just, what can we do for ourselves?
I think that's really important, because this country's so large that I almost compare America to Europe. I don't compare America to any individual country in Europe. It's so diverse that, when you think about Europe, you're almost comparing Iceland to Greece. Completely different cultures, different climates, different people. But the same thing happens here. If you're in Minnesota, how can you almost compare yourself to someone who lives in Florida? Completely different climates, different history, different backgrounds in terms of migrants, I guess. Right. You could almost pick, individual areas, like the difference between Seattle, for example, and Alabama.
Right.
It's such a diverse and large country that I almost think that you need to have government more localized, because someone in Washington, D.C. making decisions about farmers in Minnesota isn't going to be the same type of farming, the same kind of climate, the same kind of product as someone that's in Louisiana, for example. Would that be a fair statement?
Very fair. Yes, that is absolutely true. And that's why I think we need to really educate on why the state government is so important and these local elections are so important, because these are the elections, these are the people that you're going to vote in that can actually do something to change your personal life, your personal experiences. At the federal government, it's so removed that
Yes.
It's not addressing the community's needs. But when we're voting locally in these elections, in the state government, in the city governments, they are crucial because these are the people that will be making choices that will affect your community and affect your lives. And we need to do a better job in educating how important these elections are.
You mentioned taking personal responsibility. Tell me how that's possible. I mean, we're living in a capitalist society, and Europe, of course, as well. Within a capitalist society, you're rewarding the individual over the many in respect. You know, we look at government now, for example, all the multi-billionaires, what they're getting out of making those decisions. How do you increase personal responsibility? How do you give people personal responsibility or infuse them to do that when the framework in which we're living in doesn't encourage that? It's a case of it's all about me and I'm not too bothered about what my neighbours are doing or what people are doing across the road.
See, I think when we look at it generally, when we look at it federally, then yes, we wind up in that mindset of, you know, it's just about me. It's not about everybody else. But when we break it down to a local level, where it's, okay, but is it about your neighbor and your elderly, you know, grandma in the nursing home? Is it about them? Then I think we enter a different mindset where it's like, okay, yes, I do care about that. So then we can have more of a conversation of, okay, so what are we willing to do as a local community to help each other? And I think we can get further. We could have those conversations a little more than we can when we bring it to the federal global level.
It's a revolutionary idea, isn't it, that you vote because it's actually helping the community rather than you as an individual. I mean, that's an interesting concept, isn't it? People would be reluctant perhaps to embrace that because they're so caught up with themselves. But, you know, are there people out there that would vote for the bigger picture, vote for the things that are better for their community rather than for them as an individual?
I think there are, especially if we look at it as in the terms of their community.
Right.
So not the country as a whole with nameless, faceless people, but their community, their neighbors, their people that they know personally and care about. Then I think we can get into a different mindset, yes.
I think what I would then go on to say is, you're talking about building a community. What do you do when people don't feel like they're part of the community and they're excluded? Because I think one of the problems this country's having is that not everyone feels like they're taking part. People feel, and of course the rioting and all the issues we're having with law and order in this country at the moment, how do you make people feel like they're in society and they're in communities when most of the people feel alienated from that?
That's an important question, and that's a large one to answer right now.
Right.
I think it's going to start with taking a look at ourselves and asking ourselves, okay, why do these people feel disenfranchised from their community?
Right.
And actually being honest about it. And, okay, well, maybe I do have some bias. Maybe I do treat this population or this individual a little differently. And how could I do it different? I think it has to start at that level. And that is difficult to do, to challenge yourself like that, to challenge your own biases. So I think that's why it's taking so long to get there.
Sure.
But that's where it has to start.
I mean, I have a vested interest in that because I'm foreign and I'm living in a foreign country. And I think this is the comment that most people would make if they've come from other countries. I know people that are Swedish, other Brits. Obviously, I know lots of Europeans living in Minnesota. I don't feel like I'm part of the local community. I don't know whether that's because it's the type of area we live in. You have to be here 2 or 3 generations before you're accepted. But I mean, the first moment I open my mouth, I'm foreign, right? I can't get round the fact that I have an English London accent. And then if you look at people of colour, for example, or people that are wearing different clothes due to religious reasons, I would think it would be very difficult for those individuals to feel like they were part of the whole. That would be the issue. And they're not, it's not reflected in who they're voting for. I think if there was more politicians or more people in prominent positions that reflected that, they would feel more part of the community. And we spoke at the very top of this interview that you're the first woman from either party to be running to be senator in District 22.
Right.
So this is certainly overdue, is it not?
Very much so. And that's why I am encouraged by the fact that we have people of color running, we have women running, we have young people running, because we are starting to change that. And you're absolutely right. Just the people that I've talked to in the district, there are so many groups and individuals that are feeling like they're not welcomed, they're not embraced in their community. And whether I win or lose this race, that is something that I want to work on. My partner and I were talking about, we need to, at the community level, start having just events where people can come together and meet each other and get to know each other, because that's where it starts, is having a conversation with somebody from a different background than you, having a conversation with somebody that doesn't look like you or think like you, and getting to know them as a person. We live in such a polarized world because we surround ourselves with people that look and think like us.
I think in London, for example, that doesn't tend to happen because there's actually more people living in London that are foreign than there are English. Most people speak a foreign language. I think it's 53% of London speak English as a second language. So when I went to school, when I was growing up, it's such a multicultural society, and we're taught 3 or 4 different languages growing up: French, German, Italian. It doesn't become such an issue. I don't want to say again that Britain's perfect, because we have our own race issues. Nothing's perfect, right? But I do think, having come to this area, that diversity, that multiculturalism, that sense of everyone getting on. My ex-wife, I took her to Portobello Road Market in West London many years ago, and the one thing she took away from that was she could not believe all the different races, colours, ethnicities all getting on together, all in the same place. Was almost startling for her as a Minnesotan. She couldn't quite believe that was taking place.
Right.
So I think you're right in a sense that you have to know the people, you have to embrace them, you have to find out who they are.
Right. You have to be able to see them as people and not just as their skin color or as their religion. And here in this area, we're going to have to just be a little more deliberate about it, a little more conscious about it, because we don't have that natural just mingling. We're going to have to decide to do it.
This is going to be a partisan question, I guess, but do you think the Democratic Party has embraced that more in this area? You spoke about the people that are running up in Marshall, representatives. You mentioned some names and you know those individuals. Do you think that's something the Democratic Party has that's working as opposed to the Republican Party? Does the Republican Party have that diversity? I mean, you can say they do. I don't know the answer to that.
In our area, no. I mean, when you look at the representatives, the Republican representatives that we have in our area, they're all white men who have been there forever.
Right. Yes, that's the impression I get when I read the local newspapers and I see what's going on. Those individuals that are not supporting the Democrat Party and those that are on the right would say as their first argument, their first point, that the left and the Democrats are bringing disharmony, they're rioting, they're encouraging law breaking. If you're looking to get those votes and pull those people over to your side, how would you counter that?
Well, I would say that the rioting, the burning the buildings and stuff like that, we're not saying that that's okay. It's not okay. Do we understand some of where it's coming from? Sure, and that's that empathy piece. But it's not okay to do that. There are other ways to do that. So to talk to somebody from that perspective that's very against those things going on, I think we're just going to have to get down to the human level. Right. Okay, yes, those actions may be wrong. Now what do we do? What do we do moving forward? How do we move on from this so that it doesn't keep happening? How do we bring these groups together and fix our system so that we're not ending up in situations where populations of our citizens feel like that's their only way to be heard.
I was in Minneapolis yesterday, and there was the National Guard on the street because there were some decisions made. We're not going to go into the news of the moment, but I would think to myself, if the local government is putting the troops on the streets, they must be aware that they've made the wrong decision, mustn't they? Do you not think? You're kind of preempting the fact that your decision was wrong by putting those on there.
And honestly, Adrian, like, there are some issues where we're not going to be able to find a common ground.
Sure.
And so then it's looking at, okay, what can we agree on? Because we're not going to agree on this one. So where are the areas that we can agree, that we can work together? There are some issues where you're not able to compromise. Issues of racism and sexism and putting down certain populations. You can't compromise on those issues.
Well, there's going to be Democratic voters, of course, that won't agree with necessarily every single policy, right?
Right.
So, what you're saying is true of the people that are following you, as well as those that would be on the other side, of your opinion, I guess.
Right.
Putting it bluntly, a lot of people I've seen on Facebook, a lot of responses to the debates that are taking place, I think the right thinks there's a meta-narrative of sort of extreme socialism coming through democratic policies. Again, how would you kind of counter that?
Education.
Sure.
I think that there's a misunderstanding occurring in our country of what some of these things mean. So, I mean, you grew up in Europe. You know that when we talk about some of these socialist programs, we're not saying that we're not talking about communism. We're not talking about creating a system of government that is just completely socialist. Capitalism still exists in some of the countries with the most socialist programs.
That is true. I see socialism as a European, free healthcare. Well, I say free. You're paying for it in your taxes.
You're paying for it.
And you can go private if you want to. You can pay for the privilege.
And that's where some of the education needs to happen, that the private market is still there. The private market is still thriving. It's not dismantling it completely. It's just making sure that essential needs are covered. And some of the programs that we have now that everybody's fine with started out as with an opposition of it being too socialist. But right now, we're so polarized that we're not able to have those conversations and provide that education and come to that understanding because we're not willing to listen and talk to each other.
You can certainly have socialism within a capitalist framework. I mean, you can have free healthcare. You can have free education or subsidized education. We spoke some time ago about the idea of governing yourself more locally.
Yes.
Well, that's socialism, isn't it? It's, you're dealing with the person who's making decisions for you in your area lives in your area, and they're having a meeting about it, and all the people from the local community are engaged in that discussion and are making decisions that are important for Southwest Minnesota, as opposed to someone in high office in the capital doing a blanket policy for every farmer, for example, regardless of climate or geographical location.
So I don't get drawn into the conversations about Medicare for all. And so Medicare is a federal program. Like, we couldn't do Medicare for all in Minnesota, even if we wanted to. It's a federally funded program. What we can do in Minnesota is we have MNsure, and we could start expanding that little by little with the goal of all of the people within Minnesota being covered. That's our end goal. I would like to see it start to expand to cover farmers who, they're self-employed, so they have to buy into private insurance with enormous premiums and rates. So, okay, let's cover them. Let's cover the small business owners. Let's cover the people that work part-time in the small businesses so that the small businesses aren't burdened with having to try to provide medical coverage for them. Let's expand it to cover mental health care. And that leads to a personal story, because I have clients who have private insurance, but they also have $50 copays. And to come see me every week and pay $50 every week is just completely out of their budget.
Right.
And so they don't get the services that they need, and they have insurance. So let's start to expand the programs that we currently have, little by little, to cover these needs that we're not covering.
The National Health Service in Britain, you can choose to go private if you wish, but you're using the same doctors, the same nurses, and the same equipment. So it's very interesting that if you had to go and get a brain scan, is it an MIR scan? If you're going private, you're still using the same equipment. The hospital that's National Health is renting that equipment out to the private health sector to make money to feed back into the health service.
Right. To my understanding, and I'm not coming at it from a European viewpoint, but to my understanding, a lot of the private option is utilized for like elective procedures that can take a while, under the government.
You're 100%
insurance.
correct. Yeah, if you had an ingrown toenail, you're going to be on a waiting list for a long time because it's not that important.
Right.
But it's painful.
But I think that gets twisted to then give the message that you're just going to wait. If you have a heart attack, you're going to be on a wait list for months.
No.
And that's where we need to have the education. That's where we need to fight back against the rhetoric that's being put out there that is simply not true.
Yeah, my dad was diagnosed with cancer and they were operating that afternoon. My mother, who needs a hip replacement, she had to wait a year. So, it is based on, how important that procedure is. And you will get there eventually, but it's, again, not perfect, but it seems very strange as a foreigner, again, coming into the country. And I go to the doctors and suddenly I get a bill for that. It's really alien to me. It took a long time to get used to that process.
Like I'm on some mothers groups and some, they're global groups, and we've talked about getting a bill after having a baby, and it's inconceivable to these mothers that live in Europe and whatnot because, and my oldest son was born early and he was in the NICU for almost a month, and so we left the hospital with a 6-figure bill, and it's ridiculous. I
have to say that saying the statement, it's inconceivable to have a baby, is probably the funniest thing I've heard this week, and you need to put it on a T-shirt. That's just fantastic.
No, that's not what I said, is it?
I mean, inconceivable.
Oh.
It's a joke, right?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. You're going to have to get used. I just thought that was a great statement to make, right? It's a joy. That's like saying, he's given me unbelievable faith. It's remarkable. That makes me very happy. Let's cover some key areas. If you've not covered these before, what are you proposing for education? Let's break down some key policies just purely on education to start with.
Okay. Well, to start with, because we are entering such we're in a deficit right now, and the number goes up and down, and we're not really sure where it is right now, but I think right now the key for education is just protecting the funding. Because we know it's going to be on the chopping block, and we know what a detriment that will be if we let that be cut. So from there, I would like to see us working toward fully funding education, and I believe that would be looking at different sources of funding, because right now it's so dependent on property taxes.
Yes.
And so then that becomes, if we want to increase their funding, that increases property taxes, and then that becomes a burden on landowners, on farmers, and then it also creates a disparity between school districts. So school districts that are in a nice area and get lots of property taxes, they get more money. So we do need to break away from that dependence on the property taxes and find an alternative source of funding for education, and then work on fully funding education. I do believe that we need more support staff in schools. We need more school counselors in schools. We have, especially right now, we forget about our kids going through the chaos of this year and how it affects their mental health. And the school counselors, they are good people in the schools that are trying to meet these needs, but they are so overworked that they get 10 minutes with a child. And you can't do anything. Even in the company that I work with now, we send our own therapists into schools to help supplement that. And even then, they get maybe 15 minutes with a child because they're so booked up. So we need to drastically increase that. And I think that would go back to our earlier conversation about helping people feel like they have belonging, that they're part of the community. And if we can do that and start that in the schools, that will spread. And if we're talking about school safety, and I don't really want to get into the guns conversation, but if we can get mental health in the school, we can work toward increasing school safety without ever touching gun legislation. So there's that. And along with that, with high schools, I would like to start introducing trade classes, Because right now in our district, we have jobs available. We have trade jobs available that nobody is filling. So we need to figure out how to fill those positions, how to get people back into the trades. And to do that, we need to create that spark of interest. And right now we push university so much. We push four-year college so much. And that's not for everybody. And so then students get discouraged and we see, graduation rates drop. We see graduation rates for our students of color significantly decreased from our Caucasian students.
And student debt as well is a big issue.
Student debt is huge, yes. So, trust me.
You're still paying it off, are you?
I'll be paying for it until I retire, probably. But,
you should have gone into plumbing.
Exactly.
Well, no, when I was a college professor, their plumbers and plasterers were making more money than I was.
Yeah.
Universally, there's a lack of skilled trade, I would suggest.
Yeah. But our communities, our city governments, they want to get involved in this. I've spoken with several local city governments, local mayors, and they want to institute programs like this. They were talking about, in Laverne, they were talking about that they'd even started talking to the school about this. They have, these aging homes that nobody's doing anything with, and they can partner with the schools and create a semester of classes in plumbing, in electrical, in construction.
Right.
And the students can team up with a contractor and learn how to do those things as they renew that home. And then we're helping the community because we're revitalizing those older homes, and we're also teaching the students and getting them involved in trades and sparking that interest.
That almost seems like what we were doing 30, 40 years ago.
Exactly.
I remember being a child and they'd have a car there and you'd strip the car down and then put it back together again.
Right.
They would have buildings that you could practice laying bricks and doing plaster work and sheetrocking. That's almost going back to where we were at the beginning. It would almost suggest that the last 30 to 40 years it hasn't worked. We're going back to what we...
Well, we swung the pendulum too far.
Right.
So now we need to balance it out.
That's a great response. Let's talk about coronavirus response plan, because I know that's a hot topic at the moment. It's brought up in every debate that we're watching on the television.
Right.
What would your policies be in that area? What do you think? What are your opinions?
So with that, we've gone through what we've gone through this year, and we made the decisions that we did. And some of them, we could debate the decisions we've already made, for the next hour. But now we've learned from those decisions. Now we can create a plan going forward, because we know that these things can happen and will probably happen again in our lifetime. So that's why I'm proposing that we create a health emergency plan for Minnesota, so that we have our own stock of PPE, so that we have a set plan established with tiered criteria. So if it meets this level of criteria, and it's not statewide, okay? Because right now, we kind of blanket reacted statewide. Right. And that led to issues, because the needs and what's going on in District 22, in our rural district, is very different than what's going on up in the cities. And we need to be able to differentiate that. And so with this plan, this tiered system, it goes by district. So if your district meets this level, right, then it has this response. The next district meets that level, it has that response.
I think other countries are doing that, where they're isolating individual cities now within countries,
right,
to say that's got a different level to the city next to it based on the levels of people that are getting infected.
Right. But then if we have that criteria, then we also know when we've gone back down, right, when we could start loosening the restrictions, then when we could start moving back toward normal. And it's not just making decisions by the seat of your pants, it's this is the criteria, and we know if we're above or below it.
I would say I'm a fairly well-read individual, and I'm looking at current affairs. I read the newspaper. I watch various news agencies on my laptop from all over the world. I spend the first hour in the morning reading the news from all over with a cup of tea and stroking the cat. I'm finding it very difficult to understand all these different ways of being in this country. I don't understand sometimes as a well-educated individual. For example, there's been shops that have been closed in Jackson and other places that come into your district, and it's not the law. People don't have to wear a mask. Is that correct? It's not the law, and yet shops are being closed down because they refuse to wear a mask. So for me as a foreigner and reading, the local newspapers, for example, as well in Wyndham, we're currently in Wyndham doing this interview, local people were asking the local government, City Hall, whether there should be Halloween and trick-or-treating. Surely you don't need to ask permission from City Hall whether you can do Halloween trick-or-treating. That should be coming from somewhere else. They shouldn't have an opinion on that, should they? I mean, I'm just finding it very odd that I'm getting so many different things from so many different places that I'm confused, and I'm a well-read person.
Everybody's confused, and that's the problem. There's no set plan. We're just making decisions as we come to them, and there's no plan. There's no knowing where we're going,
right,
or really where we are. So that's why we need to have a set criteria-based plan so that there's no question. It's not my opinion on what we should do. This is what we've set. This is the criteria that we're following, and this is how it's going. So it's not, oh, well, I don't feel like it. I'm not going to wear a mask because I don't feel like it. This is where we're at, so this is the law right now.
Right. When
we get below this criteria, that's going to be lifted.
It needs to be more black and white, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
And it's coming from so many different places, whether it be state, federal, local, City Hall, and every message seems to be different to a certain degree.
That's why we've seen such chaos with it, and why we can't, as a country, move past it. Like other countries have gotten it under control because they had a single message that they worked with and they followed, and like New Zealand hasn't had it, or Australia hasn't had a case in months.
New Zealand hasn't had I literally, this is current news. New Zealand hasn't had a case in 24 hours of anyone getting it. Never mind the death. You know, they've not had a single case in the last 24 hours, and there are other countries.
I think in Australia it's been longer.
I think you're probably right. I need to read my Australian newspapers a little bit better. But you are right. There just seems to be a disparity, especially when you're considering first world countries in the amount of figures being bandied around there. I think we're going for a second surge, which is slightly concerning if things aren't in place and there isn't a plan.
And that's kind of where we go back to the United States is so large and there's so many different voices that we don't know what to follow. And so that's where we need to concentrate on the state, on the local level, so that we're giving a singular message to the people.
I 100% agree with you. These things are more easily managed if you're Britain and you're the size of New Hampshire, right?
Right.
This country's vast, and I don't think people realise, how large the country is. I've got some relatives that live in California. My parents say, "Why don't you visit them for Sunday lunch?" They don't understand. They think it's a 2-hour journey. They don't understand that the distance from London to Minneapolis is the same distance from Minneapolis to California.
Right.
They haven't grasped. They think I'm being rude because I've not visited my relatives in California for Sunday dinner. Which is, there's no sense of grandeur, of size in there.
Right. But even within Minnesota itself, we have such different regions. Like I was saying, between the cities and down here in District 22, like there needs to be a different response level based on, your local area.
That makes perfect sense. Can we talk about agriculture? I'm sure that's something, especially in the area we live in. That's one of the main issues I would suggest, being in southwest Minnesota. You were talking about closing zoning loopholes. What does that mean?
Well, what I found out in the course of this campaign is that so the way we have zoning, international corporations are not allowed to own farmland.
Right.
But you can have your farmland and then you go build a building on it and then you can have it rezoned as an industrial zone. And then that allows international corporations to come in and buy that land and buy the livestock and own that. And that's some of what led to the breakdown in our supply chain over the coronavirus, because they're not locally owned. The livestock is not locally owned.
Right.
So we can't make decisions locally.
There was no meat on the shelves. You go to the local grocery store, there was not a single piece of meat on the shelf.
Because the farmers who are raising the livestock, some of them anyway, don't own that livestock. They can't make those decisions. The processing plants own the livestock, the international corporations own the livestock, and so they can't just say, okay, well, this restaurant doesn't need this meat anymore, so I'm going to repackage it, resupply it to this place who does need it. They can't just do that in the moment, in the time frame that we needed to see happen. So if we can close some of those zoning loopholes that these companies are sneaking through on, then we can bring that supply chain back to a locally governed, managed place.
I think that's a great idea. But if you're going to go up against big corporations, that's going to be very difficult to organise. How would you go about that? Is that a case of sitting down with other senators and starting to work through that process? How would you, if you're going up against McDonald's, for example, how would you even start that process?
I think it'll just be a lot of talking. Yes. So we have to talk to the farmers and find out, what they see that they need to have happen. Talking to the other senators, building that. We're going to need a lot of people on board with it, and a lot of people fighting toward the same goal, Republican and Democrat. So yeah, it'll be building those relationships and doing that talking and finding common ground to work toward the betterment of our district and our state.
I'm going to hand the mic to you, and I'm going to give you as long as you need. We've covered a lot of ground there, but we haven't touched upon unity other than at the beginning, of our interview, and we've not discussed, we can discuss agriculture, racial policies and so forth. Instead of me asking questions, if I just give you the mic, what statements would you like to make to the listeners in terms of bringing them over to your ticket, being able to perhaps persuade them to vote for you over a Republican? I'll just give you the mic, and
okay.
You could say a couple of sentences, or I'm happy to sit here for an hour. I've got a cup of tea. You can just go for it.
Well, I'll stick with agriculture for a minute, because agriculture is huge in our district, and a lot of times it's looked at as pretty relied upon Republican voters. And I would challenge that and say, okay, the policies that the Republican Party has had recently, have left huge holes in serving the agricultural community. For example, we weren't able to reach common ground and get the bonding bill passed, which would have helped our local communities, which would have helped agriculture, which would have given funds to our communities for their water projects, for their sewer projects that they've been waiting on. In addition to that, our Section 179 conformity bill, that went to the Republican caucus, and they left it out of when they brought back the tax bill.
Right.
They left it out. And that would have helped the agricultural community in huge ways by Minnesota conforming to the federal changes in Section 179. So what needs to be looked at and challenged is that the Republican Party is all about agriculture, that they're serving their needs. Because they give it a lot of lip service, but they're not showing the action.
Right.
They're not showing that they're going to follow through with the lip service that they're giving. So that's what I would put out there to the agricultural community, is just really take a hard look at what has not been done. Because, my opponent, Bill Weber, what he has done, I have no issue with. But he's left a lot on the table that he's not done to serve our people, to serve agriculture, to serve our people of color. So we'll transition there. So right now, what we've seen in Minnesota, the gaping hole that we have in racial equality. And that trickles down to our area as well. We have a very diverse district in Nobles County alone. In Worthington alone, we have, I think, 42 or 49 separate languages spoken in Worthington School District. And
I'd be hard to push to name 49 different languages.
Right. We have a huge Latinx population. We have a huge Hmong population. And those populations are feeling disenfranchised. They're not feeling like they belong. And we need to do work there. We need to have programs that help that. We need to do the licensing for undocumented immigrants so that they can drive to things like school and to their court appearances, because I tell you, I've worked in Worthington for a couple years, and I had the opportunity to speak with several individuals who were undocumented, and all of them were actively trying to gain documentation to build their lives in their community and contribute and strengthen their community So we need to make sure that we are not viewing that population in the way that is propagated by some of the Republican Party. We need to view it as a strength. We need to view our diversity as a strength and not an obstacle to overcome.
No one ever mentions the immigrants that actually create jobs and run businesses.
Yes.
The go-to place for most people is, the immigrants have taken our jobs. But, when you look at the immigrants that have actually got businesses, own factories, are in manufacturing, they're actually creating jobs as well. You only get to see, or it's only spoken about as a negative issue.
Right. And you know what? In our district, we have a lot of our immigrant population working in the pork plants and the farms.
Yes.
And these were our essential workers. These were the people who were making sure that we had food in our stores that allowed us to be able to quarantine. Like, our immigrant population was out there exposed, doing their essential work, and contributing and fighting for our community to be able to keep thriving and keep going. Like, we relied on them. And so to now look at it as a negative, as this is a population that we have to deal with, is a travesty. These are people that contribute in huge ways to our community.
Due to the things that are happening at the moment, whether it be the coronavirus, rioting, race relations, everything's in the here and now. Mm-hmm. Let's move away from the here and now. Where would you see yourself in 5 years' time? So let's talk about a long-term. I mean, I can understand why we're discussing short-term things, right, because everything that's happening in the world is happening now.
Right.
And it's very important. But, to step out of that for a little bit and that sort of intensity, where would be a long-term plan or goal? Where would you be in 5 years, for example? Is that something, you've considered?
Oh, sure. In 5 years, I would like to be in my second term in the state Senate in Minnesota.
I admire your assiduity and enthusiasm. That's awesome.
I would like to have worked on regaining our budget surplus so that we could start working on these programs that I want to work on. In 5 years, I will be seeing my youngest...
More children?
No more children.
Have you got a dog by now? What's happening?
Maybe a lizard by then.
Okay, a lizard.
A gecko. Geckos are cute.
Geckos are fine. Yeah, just until they escape and you've got to try and find them.
True.
When I first came over here, I'd not seen any of the TV adverts. So everyone kept talking to me as the Geico Gecko, and I had no clue what they were talking about. People were coming up to me randomly and going, "Chips and pie and chips." And I thought, I've no clue. What are you discussing here? Oh. And of course, I then saw the Geico Gecko adverts on the television. And when I saw those for the first time, I thought, I wonder if that's an American putting on an East London accent, because it's East London, right? It's where I'm from. Oh. I looked up the actor that does the voiceovers for that, and he's actually in EastEnders. He's actually a famous actor in Britain that's in the soap opera EastEnders. So he's actually cool. A proper East Londoner. It's legit, yeah. I'm telling you. This is true. So other than the Geico Gecko that you've got, you're looking for a second term.
Yep. Yeah. 5 years. My little boy, my youngest, will probably be in first grade, so that'll be interesting to think about my family at that stage.
When did you decide to run? Did you have a conversation? I want to see what your husband's face looks like when you said, I know, I want to be senator for District 22. Was there a moment? Was there an epiphany? Was there a point where your partner looked at you glazed over thinking, what are you doing?
A little bit. I think we both kind of had that look for a little bit there. So my opponent was running unopposed.
Okay.
And we were talking, and I was talking with some of the people with the DFL, and we were just talking about how we can't allow that.
Can I ask why? Was it just the fact that this is such a strong Republican area in the past that no one wanted to step up?
I think so. I think it's viewed as such a conservative area that we can't win, but I don't agree with that.
No, I think the figures I've seen would suggest that's a lot closer than historically has been the case.
I definitely think so. And we have we elect Democrats in this area. We have Democratic mayors. We have a ton of Democratic mayors in our community.
Right. And how does democracy work, by the way, when only one person is running?
Right.
That's like being in Russia at that point, isn't it?
Right. Yeah.
So I'm glad you stepped forward to embrace the concept of democracy and choice.
Right. So we were talking about if it's something I wanted to do. I mean, my children are very young, and campaigning is a lot of hard work and long hours. I mean, we're sitting here late at night doing this, and my kids are at home without me. And if I were to win, it's going to be more of that.
Sure.
But with that thought, I was also starting to think about my kids. And as a mother, you have a vision for the kind of world, the kind of community and environment that you want your kids to grow up in. And I really had to challenge myself in that, how can I talk about it? How can I talk about the decisions I want made and the world I want my kids to grow up in, unless I'm willing to act when I have an opportunity to do so? So that really propelled me into making this decision to enter the race, because I have to put my action where my words are.
Well, I want to thank you for that. Whether you'd be Republican or Democrat, I would thank you for that, just for having an alternative and for having a sense of democracy working. I think
Right.
to have a situation where there was perhaps a Democrat and not a Republican running, would still be problematic, regardless of your party. So I want to thank you for that. Who's your hero? Who would be the person you look up to? Who's someone you aspire to, whether it be in politics or in just life in general?
I think that's an interesting one. And I always struggle with these questions, but on a personal level, I would say my mom. My mom raised all of us kids as a single mom, and she worked hard to make sure that we grew up okay. And she always gave me the message that I can do anything that I worked to do, that I put my mind to do. And she instilled that message in me. And that's the message I want to instill in my children, that the sky is the limit, that they can reach any potential.
I do think there's something in the DNA of the women that live in this part of the world. It's very pioneer woman, isn't it? She's chopping a cord of wood in the morning and giving birth in the afternoon. I find that a remarkable thing.
My mom grew up in Southern California, so it's a little different.
She's not cutting cords of wood.
No.
Picking oranges then. But there is a sense of that sort of pioneer spirit that runs through the DNA of women, I've noticed in these areas. I find remarkable fortitude. The things that they manage to get done is astounding.
We have very strong individuals in this area, and we have very strong women in this area.
I agree. No, I've witnessed that myself. It's to be applauded.
That's why I'm so glad to see more women stepping forward into leadership positions and finding that voice to represent women in this district.
Well, there's a sense as well that, how well have things gone with the men in charge? I'm aware of my gender as I'm chatting to you, but, you're thinking, has it worked that well in the past? Is it going great?
There has been that thought.
I'm sure that's crossed the minds of many people. I'm going to press you on this. Pick a figure from popular culture or politics that you would admire outside of your mother.
Can I go historical?
You can do whatever you wish.
So I have always, and this may sound odd to some of the listeners here, but I have...
To be fair, we started out saying it was going to be odd. We've already put that out there. The intention has been placed.
So Alexander the Great has always been a huge figure for me, because he had a vision of what he was going to do, who he was going to be in the history books, and he never let go of that vision. And he pushed himself and his country and everybody along with that vision.
I never thought for one moment you'd pick someone from Macedonia. That was a turn up for the books, wasn't it?
Right.
I've actually been to Macedonia. It was a very interesting place to be.
Oh, I hope to go there someday.
Macedonian Airlines was very interesting. There was like standing room, like you're on a bus. So I'm on an aeroplane going to Macedonia, and there was people standing like you're on a bus. Yeah, there's chickens flying around. It was ridiculous. The air stewardesses were bigger than me and had huge tattoos. I thought, well, if there's a fire or a crash, who do you want pulling you out of your seat and throwing you out, right?
Right.
But it was definitely an experience.
But if we want to talk about age, if we're going to go back to the beginning of this conversation here and me being young, Alexander was 25 and ruled the known world. So at 35, I don't think I'm too young to
You need to get your finger out, don't you? We've been messing around. Right. We've been doing.
Right.
Wow, you've just been sat at home with your feet up eating Doritos and watching NASCAR.
I'm having Caesar syndrome. I haven't done enough with my age.
You need to get your finger out. My ambition in life is to be on my deathbed and think I couldn't have squeezed in more.
Yes.
With the time and money, because money is important as well. I mean, you can't go to Macedonia unless you've got, a few pounds in your pocket. But, with the amount of money available to me and the amount of time available to me, I think the goal is to be on your deathbed and think I couldn't have done more.
Right.
No minute was wasted.
Right.
I think that's the key in life. But you surprised me there with your ancient historical history there. As a historian, I appreciate you putting that in there. Your hero is a Macedonian, which will please the Mediterranean people. How can people find out about more about you? Give me your website addresses if people want to contact you, ask you questions. Give me a list of all the places they can track you down.
So my website is www.shawna, SHAWNA, number 4mn.com. And on my website, I have my email listed, I have my phone number listed, and there's also a comment box you could submit on the website directly. I'm also on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and I think I even have a Pinterest, though I haven't done much with it.
Are you going to be anywhere in the near future? I don't know when this is going to be aired, but have you got plans to talk or be anywhere?
Yes. So this weekend, which may be past by the time the listener hears it, I will be up in Marshall at the homecoming parade up there, and then on Sunday I'm going to be coming back here to Windham to do a little meet and greet, and then that afternoon over in Worthington to do a meet and greet. And then next week I will be doing a Rock County fundraiser virtually, and then I will be doing a debate up in Marshall.
Am I right in thinking that Rock County is the only county in the whole of Minnesota that doesn't have a lake in it? Is that true? Did I read that right?
We have a little lake.
Yes, more a pond.
A little.
You have a pond.
And I think it's man-made.
It's a man-made. A pond in your mother's back garden doesn't count, unfortunately. We're talking lakes here. I think I'm right in saying that Rock County is the only county in the whole of Minnesota.
I think I've heard that.
Doesn't have a. Bearing in mind, this is the land of 10,000 lakes.
I think it's actually like 11,000.
1,000 can't even be bothered to name them.
Right.
Yeah, there's so many lakes we can't even bother to name them anymore. I like the fact that when you're driving through Minnesota, there's towns and places that they've run out of names. We'll call this Long Lake, but there's already 25 Long Lakes. We'll call this town Adrian because we've run out of names. I've actually stood outside of the town of Adrian, and had a photograph taken with my name.
I bet, yeah.
We'll call this one Dave. We'll call this one Colin Lake. I mean, you're literally running out of names for lakes, aren't you? Where you can't even be bothered to name the last couple of thousand because you've run out of names.
Right.
This is where we're finding ourselves. This is where we're living right now. Is there a final sentence you'd like to tell our listeners? Is there anything that you'd like to finish on before we wrap up?
Oh, let's see. Well, when I first started this campaign, I was thinking about what is my campaign song? And
always look on the bright side of life would be the way, wouldn't it?
Nope. So when I entered this, it was right in the midst of the coronavirus beginning.
Okay.
So I jumped in like March, April. And so I was thinking, okay, we've had a long, cold, lonely winter here in Minnesota, but we are going to make a change, and Here Comes the Sun by the Beatles.
George Harrison, you can't go wrong with the Beatles. You're
Right.
making an Englishman very happy. George Harrison wrote some of the best songs for the Beatles. Why My Guitar Gently Weeps, Something. What a fantastic song. He often gets overlooked, doesn't he, for his songwriting ability. You've made me very happy. Well, many thanks for joining me today. I've been speaking with Shawna Marshall. She is the prospective senator for District 22, and we found out what a vast and huge area that is for Minnesota. So thank you for joining me and being patient with me. We got through quite a lot today.
Yes, we did. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I know what your favourite hamburgers are now, and that your partner's allergic to cats. So I feel
you
as if
know a lot about me now.
I probably know more about you than your mother at this point. It just remains for me to say thank you for listening, and remember, be interested and interesting. Goodbye.